Greetings, everybody. Welcome to Armor of Truth Live, number 338. Welcome, Summer.
Hi, everyone.
There she is.
Happy Wednesday.
It is Wednesday, August the 28th, and things couldn't be weirder. More weird.
Things are odd indeed.
As we start off today, I'm going to share a quote with you, and I'm going to ask you if you agree with this quote. And later on in the show, I'm going to reveal to you the source of this quote. All right? So, pay close attention. Later on, we'll find out who this quote is. Right now, I just want to know if, does it resonate with you? Do you agree with this quote? Here we go. Most people are unaware that they're being duped. Most people don't realize they're cogs in a big technological system, unaware that pursuing the American dream is sapping their vital instincts and making them physically and psychologically inert. They use words like freedom, democracy, and progress to describe their existence, words that have been crafted and fed to them by their rulers to keep them from thinking too deeply about their real existence. Americans are one-dimensional, trapped in a false dimension of human existence, oblivious to the second dimension where true freedom, democracy, and progress exist. They live in a monolithic technocracy where free speech means only a few lonely voices will be permitted to speak their objections and challenges to the system, but no one's listening to them. Worse still, the appearance of having been heard serves only to reinforce the control of their masters. Do you agree with this quote? How does this quote land on you? Does it seem familiar to you? Do you agree with the statement? We'll return to that later, because there's an important point to be made about that. You might be surprised. What's the reason for the harsh polarization out there today? It seems as the political parties are merging together. What's the reason for that? The lines, are the lines blurred, or is the line between these parties, has it become more pronounced? Are they blending into one uniparty? Socialists are consumed with creating class consciousness. Class consciousness. That means they want to make you hyper aware of your skin color, of your salary, your status within the society, whatever that is. They're obsessed with social constructs, while at the same time they decry social constructs. Let's start out here with a couple articles that are showing how the two parties are blending together in a kind of a purple haze. It's Donald Trump last week mentioned Bill Clinton when he had the day he had Robert Kennedy on stage, the day they joined forces. He was hearkening back to a better day, and even mentioned Bill Clinton as one of those presidents of a better day. That's how far things have gotten off the rails here. Democrats are presenting themselves right now as conservatives. Kamala Harris has taken on several of Donald Trump's policy initiatives. And of course, Republicans are now the neoliberals. The Republican Party today is the Democratic Party of 20 years ago. But the DNC has no soul, it has no face, no policies, no real ideas besides what they're told to say. And Kamala Harris, just like Biden, is for sale. She's an empty vessel. The whole party's for sale. And they're currently selling themselves to conservative voters. Probably more like moderates, but still. Look at this article, this headline. Kamala Harris gets off to a strong start. This is from Peggy Noonan at the Wall Street Journal. They stole traditional Republican themes of faith and patriotism at the convention and claimed them as their own. Look at this New York Times headline. Democrats show that Republicans aren't the only ones who can wrap themselves in the flag. How about this one? The Democrats' Republican moment. This happens to be from 2016, from the Philadelphia DNC. Another headline from the 2016 DNC. Democrats claim patriotism, God, and American exceptionalism at the convention. Speaker after speaker at the convention struck themes that have long been hallmarks of Republican rhetoric, tributes to service, sacrifice, American leadership, and above all, a repeated reaffirmation of American exceptionalism. Interesting, right? And look at this. More than 200 former Bush, both McCain and Romney staffers endorse Harris. Now, the media is going crazy with this, right? It's nothing new. George Bush didn't endorse Trump last time. He's never endorsed him. But this is kind of interesting. Here's the letter they put out. This is the document that they put out. It's just a statement, right? And this is what let's see. Here's it. This is NBC, WNBC. There it is. And they're talking like this is it. This is the sign that Trump is finally falling apart. It says this, the letter. The statement. 4 years ago, President George W. Bush, the late Senator John McCain, and then Governor Mitt Romney, alumni, came together to warn fellow Republicans that re-electing President Trump would be a disaster for our nation. Another 4 years of a Trump presidency would irreparably damage our beloved democracy. What do they mean by that word? Remember that summer? We were talking about that recently.
Mm-hmm.
What do you think they mean by that word democracy?
The same way that Marxists believe in democracy.
Yeah. So they really mean, when they say freedom, like vote for freedom, they really mean freedom from, what was it that Lindsay was saying the other day? They mean it's like freedom from the oppressive
Right.
capitalism, really.
Well, here's the slide right here. Michael O'Fallon did a really great job with freedom. Whenever you see the sign freedom behind Kamala Harris and Tim Walz, please realize that they are not referring to freedom from collectivist tyranny. The freedom that they are proclaiming is freedom from free market capitalism and our constitutional republic. The freedom that they promise is a world free from being forced to earn a living, think and plan for your life well, and a life free of bad decisions, as every decision will be made for you. Free from a world of oil and gas, from individual ownership of everything, from the need to prosper and succeed. Free from a world where your thoughts are your own thoughts. Free from a world of meritocracy. Free from a world of autonomy. Free from a world of spontaneous travel. Under the Biden and Harris, the Harris and Biden administration, you will be liberated from the cruel world of the American project and the freedom to pursue happiness that has brought wealth and prosperity to nearly every non-corrupt nation in the world. Yes, you will be liberated from the chains of liberty, of personal sovereignty. This is the freedom Harris and Walz are referring to. That's Michael O'Fallon.
From Sovereign Nations.
That's right.
That's a really good breakdown.
It is.
That's a good breakdown because he's speaking from the perspective of he's speaking from the shoes of the progressive left, which is synonymous with socialism, which is synonymous with, well, the ultimate realization of socialism is communism in the classical sense.
Right. So again, they have the same vocabulary, but they have a different dictionary.
That's right. So this letter that George Bush and McCain supporters and Romney put out. It goes on and says, we made those announcements months before lies about a stolen election became everyday talking points, and 6 months before Trump incited an insurrection, cheering on a mob of sore losers and sycophants as they tried to use force to overturn the will of the American public. We reunite today, joined by new George H.W. Bush alumni, to reinforce our 2020 statements and for the first time jointly declare that we're voting for Vice President Kamala Harris and Governor Tim Walz this November. Of course, we have plenty of honest ideological disagreements with Vice President Harris and Governor Walz. That's to be expected. The alternative, however, Trump, is simply untenable. At home, another 4 years of Donald Trump's chaotic leadership, this time focused on advancing the dangerous goals of Project 2025. Of course. And that will hurt real, everyday people and weaken sacred institutions. Abroad, democratic movements will be irreparably jeopardized as Trump and his acolyte, J.D. Vance, kowtow to dictators like Vladimir Putin, while turning their backs on our allies. We can't let that happen.
Yeah, so you can really see the alliances right now.
We're heartfully calling on friends, colleagues, neighbors, and family members to take a brave stand once more to vote for leaders that will strive for consensus, not chaos, that will work to unite, not divide, that will make our country and our children proud. Those leaders are Vice President Kamala Harris and Governor Tim Walz. So what's the deal here with this? Here's what's interesting about this. When you look closer at it, on the surface, it's like, wow, look at this. Here's a real faction of old neocons that are lining up against Trump. Well, let's just get this straight right now. There is no love lost between neocons and Donald Trump. Trump is not a big fan of these guys. But when you look closer at this, it really doesn't appear to be anything other than Romney, George W. Bush. McCain is dead and gone. And George H.W. Bush, of course, is dead and gone. So what is this document? I didn't show you all the names. You don't know what the document is. Look at this. Here are, let's just give you a full screen here. So there you go. There's the heading. They put this out. And here, signed by all of these people. Look at all these people. Wow. Wow, look at that. That's a lot of names. That looks really bad. Look at all these high level names. That 200 names. 200 names. It's a flood of names. Who are they? Who are these names? Well, it turns out, when you look a little closer at this, there's a name on here, Frank Gifford Scully. He was a volunteer of John McCain's 2000 presidential campaign. Someone called Chelsea Henderson, who volunteered for McCain's 2008 campaign that he lost in a landslide to Barack Obama. And it goes on and on like this. It's volunteers and aides. It's not really, these are not really congressmen and senators, not very many anyway. But USA Today, CBS News, New York Times, they're very happy to point this out. Say, this is the tide turning. It's devastating to Trump's campaign. Meanwhile, the evidence is anyway, whether you believe the narrative or not, the narrative is that Trump has been endorsed by actually relevant figures, Democrat Robert F. Kennedy Jr., former Congresswoman and Democrat Tulsi Gabbard, Tony Stark himself, Democrat Rocket Man Elon Musk also, and others. There are others who will come. So I just wanted to share this with you because as the parties seem to blend, if you've been at this, I'm sure if you're watching this, you've been at this a while now. You understand that we're talking about two sides of the same coin, two wings to the same bird. In most cases, they're really after the same outcomes. But there does appear to be, at this point in time, a real movement for bona fide socialism. As we would say here, we don't think there's any difference. It's communism. We've put out a new Substack article yesterday. We want to draw your attention to this. Tragedy and Hope, How American Elites Built the Soviet and Nazi Regimes. Two important authors who exposed the globalists shaping world events. All right, so we're taught, we've all been taught, that Russians, Nazis, and socialism were our enemies. However, research has revealed that major Wall Street financiers were involved in the development of the Soviet Union, the development of and maintenance of the Soviet Union and Nazi Germany and other regimes that were presented to us as our mortal enemies. The two authors we're drawing your attention to here in this piece that we've written for you are Anthony C. Sutton and Carol Quigley. For different reasons and operating from different perspectives, these two men, scholars both, arrived at the same conclusion. The evidence suggests that major funding for both sides of Europe's wars, ideological conflicts, including both world wars, much of it came from U.S. sources, banksters, we like to call them. We know that Lenin was the first to put Marx's ideas into practice after having been trained up in Germany and then sent to Russia in 1917 to make the massive Bolshevik Revolution happen. Russia then becomes a major force in World War I and World War II. Now, Ephesians 5:15-16 exhorts us. The Apostle Paul sending this letter was sent out not only to the Ephesians, it was sent out as kind of an encyclical. It was sent out to many churches, addressed to the Ephesians, because this was a universal message for the people of that day. Look carefully then how you walk. Be careful. Pay attention. Be aware. Not as unwise, but as wise. Don't be foolish. Pay attention. Discern through the lens of truth, making the best use of the time, because the days are evil. We live in a perverted age, and the need to be grounded in God's Word is greater now than ever before. It's important that we understand our times. And now for this, for the love of truth and our Christian duty to understand our times, we submit to you here in this article a couple authors we think you need to add to your library. Carol Quigley and Anthony Sutton. Secular perspectives, of course, but they're going to be useful in helping you understand the times in which you live. Anthony Sutton was a British-American economist and historian known for his controversial research on Western financial elites. Only controversial because it exposed a lot of people that didn't want to be exposed. Sutton's work challenged the accepted narratives about political movements and implicated wealthy elites, including those controlling American academia. And unsurprisingly, after publishing one of his books titled National Suicide, Military Aid to the Soviet Union, which criticized U.S. policies aiding the Soviets, Sutton was asked to leave his position at Stanford University in 1973. But that didn't deter Sutton. He kept going. He kept researching and writing and giving lectures and interviews until his death in 2002. You can check out this article to see some of the books and some of the quotes, some of the things he said. Now, as Summers pointed out here, that this helps to explain for us what's going on with something like the BRICS bloc of nations. You want to just give us a brief explanation of what you mean, why you included these two pieces in with this article.
Well, sure, because the BRICS nations, the BRICS bloc, everybody's sort of thinking that that's sprung up as a retaliation, or, everybody's starting to put their money over there and it's all happening organically, and that's how the press is pushing it. And in fact, in the same way that we can see, like what we've outlined in this article about how there's been that hidden hand, if you will, that's been affecting all the world wars and making these conflicts happen, rising up these nations, actually backing the nations that are supposed to be the boogeyman, how the BRICS bloc was actually, if you look at the inception of it, it was conceived by the globalists themselves, and there is much evidence, including with Quigley, what Quigley researched as well, and others that show, and without a doubt, that the BRICS bloc is actually their creation, and they're in control, and so it's a transfer of power and wealth. And this is them just creating another power hub to, control the world. I mean, that's essentially what it is. But they would, of course, want you not to understand that that's what's happening. So in a sense, you just think of it as they're moving their HQ to the BRICS bloc, but they're very much in total control of that BRICS bloc. And everybody that's within the BRICS is further along in the adoption of the digitalization and a lot of these technological advancements. They're actually further along than even some countries in the West in this implementation. So just to not be deceived that this thing is out of their control. Actually, BRICS is the next power hub that they are very much in control of.
And it's not a new thing, right? This is something, that's what this article that we put out for you today is. Well, for us, it's a brief article at about 2,000 words. It should take you about 10, 15 minutes to read it. But the resources, for example, we've got we've got a link to read Anthony Sutton's book here online. You click that link right there and you can read Wall Street and the Bolshevik Revolution. It's not a long book, but it's...
Yeah, you can check that out, and then I'm going to pop up on the screen about Jim O'Neill real quick.
All right.
So I'm just going to read through some of these points. Jim O'Neill, now known as Lord O'Neill of Gatley, is the man who invented the BRICS acronym. He worked for Goldman Sachs, Bank of America, yada, 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 Swiss Bank Corporation. He is a WEF contributor and is connected both to European Economic Think Tank and the World Bank. And O'Neill himself spelled out the term, or actually he was just interviewed in 2021 and with the International Monetary Fund, so the IMF, and he said that, quote, BRICS is nothing less than the creation of a new form of global economic governance, aka BRICS Plus, BRICS and other nations, the ones that have come on board with BRICS, is a globalist technocrat creation for the 21st century to keep power. Back to you.
Right. So the idea is that these groups, these financial elites were involved in establishing regimes and maintaining regimes. Specifically, we're talking about the Soviet Union here, but also the Nazi regime. Carol Quigley is the other name we featured for you in this article. Quigley's Tragedy and Hope, A History of the World in Our Time, which we have here somewhere.
I do have it up on the screen for you.
Okay, yeah. So, Quigley's book was released in 1966. Now, this is a key insider source on what we call the New World Order. As it existed, the form that the idea existed in the early 20th century. Quigley argues that a network of financial and political elites led by the round table groups, including figures like J.P. Morgan and British banking elites, shaped world events to establish a global system of financial control. Okay? Quigley lived from 1910 to 1977. Now, he was an American historian who taught at Harvard, Princeton, and Georgetown, but Georgetown is his primary spot. That's where he mentored future elites, including the likes of William Jefferson Clinton. He was also a respected establishment figure. He was one of the Northeast elites, if you will. And in his work, he revealed how a small group of elites have significantly influenced global political and economic developments, including funding both sides of wars when necessary. Now, Quigley got this information when he was asked by certain members of the Round Table group to write a history of their historical achievements, what they believed were good works. So Quigley was given unique access to their private archives and documents for his research, which included meeting minutes, personal and professional correspondence, and other records that revealed, for example, involvement in the establishment of both the Soviet and Nazi regimes. So, now, the differences between Sutton and Quigley are these. Quigley was respected as a serious academic. Sutton was sort of canceled, and it's because of the positions that now Quigley had served in for the elite, mentoring leaders for decades. Sutton was more independent, but Quigley believed that this conspiracy that he uncovered, he believed that their intentions were, quote, largely commendable, unquote. Now, that's not true because, as you see here, and the New York Times reported in 1902, the Round Table movement claimed to have formed their secret society to, quote, gradually absorb the wealth of the world, unquote. Lionel Curtis, a leader in the movement, supported the idea of a world government with enforcement power, even collaborating with H.G. Wells on this vision. You'll hear some more about that in just a minute. Anthony Sutton, however, takes a far more critical tone, seeing these influencers as less as saviors and more like vampires, operating at the expense of the public good and extracting the energy and effort from peoples and nations for their own profit and power. Now, there's another point to be made here, too, is that Quigley believed that, well, I don't know if he believed it, but Anthony Sutton and F. William Engdahl believed that Quigley wrote his work, but then it was, how did they say it here? They said they believe his... very likely Quigley's original writing had been vetted to some degree before it was released in order to mitigate the implication in any egregious conspiracies for those who were still living. Because in Quigley's book, Tragedy and Hope, his contention is that these financial elites just sort of trailed off, just their influence waned in the middle of the 20th century. Well, that's not the case, and Sutton and Engdahl both agree that while Quigley's work is an accurate telling of events, clearly someone encouraged him to say that it didn't really exist anymore in that way. Well, and also, it wasn't only that, the rest of Quigley's revelations were so revealing that in 1966, immediately after it was published, several establishment figures mentioned by Quigley attempted to suppress his book. They even destroyed the plates. Back then, you printed a book, you had to have original plates, which is how you kept the copyright and all that. Today, you can just do, you could just take a digital version and mass produce it, and that's how we've got versions of Tragedy and Hope today. But anyway, so this is an article with more resources for you for your research if you want to understand a little bit more about who it is that's controlling, pulling the levers of power. And we'll share a little bit of this video that we've got for you, uploaded here into our Substack article for you here. Let's just a few clips from this. Let's check this one out first. Bill Clinton from the 1992 Democratic National Convention mentioning his mentor, Carroll Quigley.
I want every person in this hall and every person in this land to reach out and join us in a great new adventure to chart a bold new future. As a teenager, I heard John Kennedy's summons to citizenship. And then, as a student at Georgetown, I heard that call clarified by a professor named Carol Quigley, who said to us that America was the greatest nation in history because our people had always believed in two things: that tomorrow can be better than today, and that every one of us has a personal moral responsibility to make it so.
Personal moral responsibility to make it so. All right, well, let's pop forward here to this point where G. Edward Griffin's going to explain a little bit more about this for us, about this, what we're listening to here and the nature of it.
Now, that evolved very quickly after Cecil Rhodes' death. It became clear that they weren't.
I needed to go ahead and give you this bit too before we listen to G. Edward Griffin, because he's going to talk about the Cecil Rhodes and the Rhodes Scholarship. The Rhodes Scholarship is a prestigious international postgraduate award that enables students who win it, it's a very select group, of course, allows them to study at Oxford. It was established in 1902 by the will of Cecil Rhodes. Some say Cecil Rhodes, but I'm from the South. It is awarded based on academic excellence, leadership potential. The idea here is that Cecil Rhodes and some of these same banking elites, we're using the term banking elites, they're not just bankers. They're just the guys with the money and the power. Would play a role in deciding who got these or who gets these, this particular scholarship, because they intended for these people to have an impact on the world. Rhodes Scholars are selected from various countries, the U.S., Canada, Australia, India, and others, making it one of the oldest and most highly regarded scholarship programs globally. All right, so now let's listen to a little bit more.
Weren't going to quite accomplish the spread of the British Empire in that fashion. And by the time they took in their American partners from the United States, people like the Rockefellers and so forth, this goal rapidly changed away from spreading the British Empire, the British culture, to creating what they called a new world order, which was a world government ruled from behind the scenes, not to be done by guns, not to be done by invading armies. It was to be done through infiltration of the power centers of society. To be done not by large numbers of people, but a very small group of people in the secret society who would consciously go into the power centers of society, move to the top, and lead the masses through the organizations to which they belong. People have a herd instinct. We move together. We flock together. We have leaders. We have opinion leaders. But what is this structure? Weishaupt called it rings within rings within rings.
That's Isaac Weishaupt he's mentioning there. Summer.
What he meant by that was that the people involved in this secret group were not to be aware that they were being directed by a smaller group. The result of this strategy and these goals is that this organization remains invisible. Now, originally that was Cecil Rhodes and a brain trust from British banking circles and politics. As I mentioned a moment ago, that center of gravity shifted away after Cecil Rhodes' death to the Rockefeller Group, and now it has centers of very strong influence in such groups as Bilderberg Group, the Trilateral Commission, the Royal Institute for International Affairs. In the United States, they didn't call it that, I guess because they figured Americans didn't care for the word royal. So they didn't use that name. In the United States, they called it the Council on Foreign Relations.
All right, Council on Foreign Relations. So basically, now the reason that Quigley may have said that that this influence sort of died out in the middle of the 20th century is because it did shift, as G. Edward Griffin said there, from J.P. Morgan led or dominated to a Rockefeller led or dominated group. And maybe that's why Quigley's book seems to indicate that maybe their power ended. That's all speculation, but let's move ahead to this. We're going to hear from James Corbett. I need to give credit to James Corbett for this piece here. This is an old piece from the Corbett Report.
Long time, and was actually a director for some period of time. I never mentioned that when I was campaigning.
we don't need to hear from the Penguin today. Does anybody think Dick Cheney looks like the Penguin? Talks like Burgess Meredith, who played the Penguin? Nobody? Nobody at all. Thank you very much. 14. Here we go.
See, Wells wrote at length about the ways the wealthy elite and technocratic caste were conspiring to engineer a system of global control. Writing of the importance of an international financial system in implementing this self-styled open conspiracy, Wells notes, "The necessary maintenance of a money system by a central world authority upon a basis that will make money keep faith with the worker who earns it, and represent from first to last for him the value in staple commodities he was given to understand it was to have, and if we conceive credit adequately controlled in the general interest by a socialized world banking organization, we shall have defined the entire realm from which individual property and unrestricted individual enterprise have been excluded." In this passage, Wells brazenly asserts that all the elite are asking for is control over the world money supply and iron fist control over the
This is H.G. Wells, by the way.
international issuance of credit. Other than that, people would be free to act as they please in the coming world state. The game plan of the ultra-elite, those select few who hold the purse strings of entire nations in their hands, has not changed in centuries. They continue to push for the formation of world government as a way to formalize their control over the supposedly free nations of the world and expand their already incalculable wealth. The simplicity of the entire plan is laid bare in a simple observation. The financiers used Bilderberg minions like Greenspan and Bernanke to create the problem. Now they send Bilderberg emissaries like Geithner to propose their solution of increased control. They broke the economy, and unless we expose this operation for the transparent scam that it is, they're going to fix it. A child would understand. We are only now beginning to discover what Professor Quigley was writing about in the mid-20th century, and what Bill Clinton was learning about when he was going to university. Yes, as G. Edward Griffin pointed out in that speech in Austin, Bill Clinton, the Rhodes Scholar, was merely tipping his hat to those in the know when he name-checked Carroll Quigley at his presidential candidacy acceptance speech.
Yes, now, I want to show you something. This is what they...
Now, this part here is a little bit difficult to hear because the quality's bad, but I'll encourage you, if you go to our article and listen to it with your headphones or on your own system, you might be able to hear it a little bit better. But what Quigley talks about here is he's explaining, let's see, if you raise one point, the interviewer asks, if you raise one point that doesn't fit, they say, see how clever the conspiracy is. And Quigley says, yes, I want to show you something. And this is what they start with. And Quigley goes into his pocket and pulls out a dollar bill. Right? And Quigley says, and they say, why is there a pyramid with an eye over it on this dollar bill? Do you see? This is the symbol of the secret society. Now, if you ask people, it goes on. The interview goes, which secret society? And Quigley says, the secret society, because according to them, there's only one. You see, according to them, the secret society. That's gone through generations, gone through time. Well, Quigley says, yes. Now, if you ask the United States government why that pyramid is there, they have great difficulty explaining, and they mostly come up with something. It's the Masons. It's a Masonic symbol. But then when you say, why should the Mason symbol be on the American dollar bill, they don't really have an explanation. So there is something. If you look at this monument in Alexandria to George Washington, it is a pyramid. This is interesting to hear this out of Georgetown scholar. He says that the people say, you see, now the eye over it is the light, you see. So I could go further into this, but won't have to, because this symbol is at least 6,000 years old, and I can give you the history of it. He goes on to say that it's really not the Mason's symbol. It's an old Egyptian symbol, of course, for the Eye of Providence or the Eye of Ra, whatever. So anyway, there's very interesting conversation here. I encourage you to check out our article for all of this information. There are a lot of links included at the bottom. Here's a video that Summers included from James Lindsay on how Marxism became popular. How has Marxism taken hold in a capitalist nation, right? It's not supposed to happen that way.
Let's play some of that clip just a little bit.
Okay. Well,
if you can.
Where? Do we have the time?
It's there. It's there. I believe it's around minute 4 or so.
Marx was this stupid peasants to become socialists instead of having the uprising from the bottom. And that's when communism became popular, because now you've had a humongous political revolution in a giant country that's massively industrializing very quickly, and that's a major force in World War I and World War II. And so that Marx was largely obscure, trafficked in dark corners of intellectual currents until somebody got Lenin hopped up on it. And there are reasons why Lenin got hopped up on it. He's a psychopath in his own right, but the Tsar killed his brother, so he had a grudge. There's all this stuff that goes into it. And so until Lenin made it a force on the world stage, Marxism didn't really go anywhere.
This is where we brought to you the other day, last Saturday, we did the show on how has it happened that Marxism lived. It should have died out. It wasn't all that popular. Well, it's because
secret societies.
The revolutionary spirit behind Marxism is the same revolutionary spirit in Freemasonry, or just generally these secret societies that we're talking about, because these same financiers and bankers that Quigley and Sutton were writing about, same people.
Yeah, I mean, Lenin was schooled up in Germany on Marx, taught Marxist strategies in Germany, and then sent into Russia to lead the Bolsheviks while being financed by Wall Street as well. So think about that for a minute. Crazy. As the story goes, it's 2,000 Bolsheviks that went in and changed history, and it was supposed to be this grassroots uprising, like you're taught that in school, but that's not at all what happened. They dropped him in and then changed history and made Russia this huge world power and influence through the next wars.
No, I was just saying maybe you want to put a graphic up there. Anyway, it's just let me just give a little background just to pick up on what you said there, because it's important. Socialism in Europe, mostly in Europe, early in the 20th century, was going to be the thing that saved the world, right? But it failed time and time again. Failed in the Soviet Union, failed miserably there. When Joseph Stalin's atrocities were uncovered, socialism couldn't really be defended anymore, economic socialism. So they started to they changed their ethical standard. The way it used to be, let me get this book so I don't miss these points. Stephen Hicks has written about this so clearly. So more than anything, Marxism is really, it's a moral argument against alienation and oppression. Alienation meaning the workers are alienated from what they produce at work, and the oppression is that you're getting paid as little as possible. You're not appreciated.
It's a religion.
Yeah.
Communism, I was just going to read this to them. It's up there. Communism is an entitlement complex in the form of a religion, misunderstood to be an economic system. So there is a very real religious component to Marxism. It is very spiritual, but the dark side of spirituality.
So socialism made 3 predictions, and they all failed. First, it predicted that the proletariat, the working class, would increase, and as the working class increased, what they could earn would decrease, and so they would become poor. Second, it predicted that the middle class would disappear altogether. Some would become upper class, some would become bourgeoisie, and others would become proletariat. And third, it predicted that the capitalists would also decrease as a percentage of the population. That's not how it worked out. All those things went exactly the other way. And so what happened was, in the Soviet Union particularly, Marxism taught that the capitalist period is necessary because that's what develops the working class that will ultimately revolt against the bourgeoisie, the landowners and company business owners, the employers. But it never happened because capitalism did too good a job of meeting the basic needs. So the moral argument for socialism is this: a government is moral when it provides for the basic needs of its people. That's morality. So they said capitalism is evil because it does not provide for the basic needs of its people. So the assumption there is that only the government can provide for the basic needs of the people, but in a capitalist system, in a free market, the people can provide for themselves. That's not part of the argument. And that's because Marx and these socialists have a very, very low view of you and me and all of us. They don't think we know what's best for us. They don't think we can take care of ourselves. That's primary to their point. And so they believe that socialism needed an aristocracy. It needed strong leadership. Because what Marx said was that eventually the proletariat or the working class would just naturally revolt. Because, as he believed, that when the working class became so big that their wages would be so small, the poverty would drive people to revolution. Never happened. Never happened. Because capitalism, in a free market, in a liberal democracy, adjusted regulations. Children were no longer allowed to work in factories. Good regulations.
That's why they brought about identity politics.
Yeah, this eventually it comes to that, right? Yeah, that's what we're getting around to. In all cases, classical Marxist theory had to be modified. And this is what we just heard Lindsay say, and Summer was alluding to there, that it had to be modified. The capitalist stage of the process of classical Marxism had to be skipped. And Lenin was the first to do this. So the revolution would have to be led top down by the elites. The revolution is never bottom up. And that's what Marx essentially got wrong. The masses must be told what they need and how to get it by the elites, because they have a very low view of the people. And this continued on to the Fabian socialists, who were one of the first, the British socialists, the British communists really, believed that they shunned classical Marxism for this new style of Marxism that was going to be implemented slowly, evolutionary.
Yeah, their mascot is the turtle, right?
Yeah.
So it's the idea of,
a gradual process.
Very gradual sneaking into our culture.
It says the working classes were themselves clueless about their real needs and their real but masked state of oppression. See, you don't even realize it right now, but you're oppressed. In this capitalist society, you're oppressed, and you don't know it. And so that's what the social engineers are here to do, the demoralization and destabilization. Part of that process is to create class consciousness in everyone. I'll talk more about class consciousness in just a minute. But the problem is there was two moralities, a false morality, and then there was capitalism. And so the idea was that socialism had a moral crisis of faith when, after Joseph Stalin's regime, it was revealed, Nikita Khrushchev revealed at some point, and then it was corroborated that millions of people had died under his rule. Executions, starvations. So it was difficult to defend it anymore. Is it possible that there's some flaw in socialism itself? Well, of course not. The problem, so the socialists agree, it can't be socialism. It's, you know what it is? It was Stalin. He didn't do it right. So that became the argument. The argument became, they focused on tearing down capitalism and then also arguing that there are no true socialist states, nations, governments on the earth. We've never seen a real one. So that's what we heard from Mickey Willis in that clip the other day when he went around and listened to these young democratic socialists.
And they've got the sticker on there
Yeah.
for communism and stuff. And
Yeah.
they're like, oh, it's a new kind of communism. It's never been tried before.
Yeah, exactly. So this is the new one that's going to work, right? And this is what they look like. I've got a video that will pull up for you here in just a minute.
You going to play that clip from Freedom News TV?
Yeah, I'm going to play that clip.
Perfect.
And then, but before I do that, I want to show you this right here. This is a graphic from, goodness, what happened to my thing here? I'll have to go full screen there. From Stephen Hick's book, Explaining Postmodernism. Highly recommend it. So as you can see here, this is what actually happened. Democide is defined as killing of one's own people, when a government kills its own people, okay? And what you see here is you see three categories: democracy, an authoritarian regime, and totalitarian regimes. So from 1900 to 1987, in democratic nations and liberal democracies, 2 million people died at the hands of their government. In authoritarian regimes, that would be more like, we would call those fascist, what they call far right. 29 million people were killed by their governments. But the far left, totalitarian governments, now when you pull back the Nazi regime there, the communist governments altogether account for 110 million of that 138 million deaths. So that's how successful communism is, or socialism is. Socialism failed, so they had to have new arguments. There are no true socialist states out there. Real communism's never been tried. Capitalism cannot provide for your basic needs. It's not supposed to. The government's not supposed to provide for your basic needs. So there's a fundamental difference in how people see the way the world is organized. And secondly, all people suffer. Now this is, okay, so as Summer said a minute ago, it had to be adapted. So instead of talking about class, now the argument became that capitalism has made people so comfortable that they don't even realize they're oppressed anymore. And so instead of you can't argue anymore that capitalism isn't successful, that people don't prosper in it. So now you have to change the argument, and you have to create this what we're calling cultural Marxism, where you have people resenting each other. This is where we've talked about before, the recruitment of resentment. So you might be very happy with your job. You might not realize that you're oppressed. Don't you see this guy over here who's got more than you? Never mind whether he might have worked harder, earned it, or whatever. But it's free market, and you should be resentful of that. You see this guy over here who's got this job that you want? You should be resentful for that. Do you see what this is? This is a really juvenile, childish kind of perspective on the world. But this is how they go about it. So it's all people suffer from relative poverty, is what they said. And so instead of being communism being the party of the poor, now socialism, communism becomes the party of all people, telling all people that you are living in relative poverty wherever you are. So they focus on the inequalities between people inside a capitalist system, and they shift to attacking big business, attacking the affluent. In other words, it becomes all about equality. And when they make it about equality, then comes the resentment. So it's resentment rather than actual need. That becomes the motivation for revolution. So it moves from need to equality. So they start arguing less from Karl Marx's words, and they start arguing more from Jean-Jacques Rousseau's philosophy. And this brings us to class consciousness. Creating this misery and resentment in your mind must be engineered if you're going to subvert a capitalist system. So now we come back, Summer, to the opening of the show when I said, here is a quote that I want to share with you. I'll go back and let me share this quote one more time. Now, I want you to listen to this quote, and do you agree with this quote? One more time. Here we go. Listen closely. Most people are unaware that they're being duped. Most people don't realize they're cogs in a big technological system. They don't know. They're unaware that pursuing the American dream is sapping their vital instincts and making them physically and psychologically inert. They use words like freedom, democracy, and progress to describe their existence, but these words have been crafted and fed to them by their rulers to keep them from thinking too deeply about their real existence. Americans are one-dimensional, trapped in a false dimension of human existence. Americans are oblivious to that second true dimension where true freedom and true democracy and true progress exist. Americans live in a monolithic technocracy where free speech means only a few lonely voices will be permitted to speak their objections and challenges to the system. But no one's listening to them. Worse still, the appearance of having been heard serves only to reinforce the control that their masters have over them. Okay. Do you agree with that quote? Does that quote resonate with you at all? Why don't you give us? What do you think? Just when you hear that, just without giving away the whole gag here. Let's see. What do you think about?
Yeah.
that?
Well, you're thinking that sounds. Yeah, like that could definitely be plausible.
Well, it sounds to me a lot like how I was talking. I don't know, last week, or this sounds like me sometimes. Right? Don't you know? It's like I remember when I worked at a big company one time, making fiber optic cables, and they paid very well, but I worked on this 12-hour night shift, and so the people who worked there, look, we didn't have to work there. We chose to work there. Nobody made us do it, but we like to complain. And you call that the golden handcuffs. These are my golden handcuffs. It's a lot of money, but I really can't enjoy it because I'm just working all the time, Who put that in your head? Why did I think that? Why did I buy into that? Why was I ever influenced to think of a job that paid me really well and gave me health insurance and a 401k? Why did it ever occur to me to complain about that? I mean, I had 2 weeks of vacation. I think it went eventually 3 weeks of vacation. I mean, it was except for the 12-hour night shift, is pretty good, and you got paid a shift premium for that. No, but don't you understand? They're taking advantage of you. And I've thought that way. I used to resent and be angry at my supervisors because they were my supervisors and I wasn't a supervisor. What is that but resentment? And it's misplaced. It's misguided. Now, the quote that I read for you at the top, and I just read for you again, I know it sounds familiar. It sounds like the truth movement. It sounds like every video from 2015 where everyone's waking up left and right and they're noticing that the government's corrupt and all this. That quote is from Herbert Marcuse, who became the #1 Marxist scholar in America. Of course, from the Frankfurt School. And the funny thing about Karl Marx and Marcuse and these other Frankfurt School cats is when the heat came down in their homelands, where did they go? Did they go off to communist countries? Did they go off to in nations where communist governments were in power and live there? No, they didn't. No. Marx went to London, capitalism. Marcuse and the Frankfurt School throng, eventually to Michel Foucault, they came to the United States of America and got jobs and earned livings. And while they did it, they embedded this message. This is how the demoralization began. Part of it, anyway. The kind of demoralization that Yuri Bezmenov was talking about. It didn't come from where we thought it was going to come from. But we've all been influenced by it. What I'm describing to you now, what I was, how I felt about, I'm angry at the government because I see that both parties are the same. They don't care about me. That's class consciousness. They're creating in you a class consciousness, and it's not good. It's a disease. It is not good for you to think that way. Even if it's true. It's not good to think of yourself in terms of class consciousness, but it's been embedded in us. It's a big part of the blogosphere and YouTube and Rumble. It's a big part of the libertarian movement today, the truth movement online. If you're someone who's thinking, I'm not voting because it's all corrupt, they don't care about me, they don't have my best interest in mind, if that's what you're thinking, like there are a lot of Christians today who are thinking they're not going to vote because they can't stand to vote for Kamala Harris. I mean, they can't stand to vote for Donald Trump, and they don't think they could handle voting for Kamala Harris, so they're just not going to vote at all. Well, listen, you can't decide whether or not you're going to vote based on whether or not you fit into one of these categories or not. This is the reason they don't want to do it, is because they don't want to be identified as someone who voted for Donald Trump. So if you're someone who's deciding that you're not going to participate in the system, forget about the federal election. You've got your local government that you need to be aware of what's going on there, because they're going to affect you first. If you have been convinced to not engage this system, it's because you've been influenced by, what's it called, son? Liberating tolerance. The idea of liberating tolerance. The whole idea of where they're creating class consciousness. They create resentments in us. And I'm telling you, a Christian can't walk around with resentments. Those are sins. And the reason we have to overcome that is because if we don't, we're playing right into the hands of this socialist movement. So yeah, I'll read the actual full quote from Marcuse so you'll know what we're talking about. He uses this is from Marcuse's book, or his writing, One-Dimensional Man, where he uses a character called Joe Sixpack. He says, Joe Sixpack is a product. He's a constructed part of an oppressive and dysfunctional competitive system, but one that is overlain with the veneer of peace and comfort, unaware that he's a cog in an artificial technological system, sapping his vital instincts, making him physically and psychologically inert. Capitalism does not merely oppress the masses existentially, it represses them psychologically. Here's his world described in terms of freedom, democracy, progress, but these are words that have been constructed for him, crafted and fed to him by his capitalist apologists to keep him from thinking too deeply, oblivious to this real dimension where true freedom, democracy, and progress lie. So my point here is be very careful with that resentment, because it's very likely that resentment you feel is a product of the demoralization and destabilization, too, that's been happening inside America for decades now.
Right. And can I just say that Marcuse, when he wrote his book, Repressive Tolerance, he said that liberating tolerance, it involves actively opposing ideas and values that perpetuate societal repression, particularly those aligned with traditional and Christian values. So the aim is to undermine social cohesion by attacking reality itself so that they can then own reality. So when we come out and we complain about the country that we're living in or the system or this, that, and the other, bear in mind that you're actually contributing to this negative thinking, this sort of Marxian thinking that is trying to tear apart the system that we have. Our system can always be improved, but not to the extent in which many of us have fallen prey to just dive in and completely tear apart and tear down the system that's actually allowed us to have freedom of speech and allowed us to have an economy for as long as it has. So understanding this and how our minds have been poisoned and infected by this ideology, which is very insidious.
It is, and an example of what Summer's talking about here. Here's an article from NPR. Understanding multiracial whiteness and Trump supporters. Class consciousness. This is another way class consciousness is created in people. They say in this article that multiracial whiteness is a term used to describe how non-white individuals can also adopt attitudes and behaviors commonly associated with white identity, particularly those linked to the political right and Trump support. So one of the quotes from the article says, multiracial whiteness reflects an understanding of whiteness as a political color, not simply a racial one. In other words, whiteness isn't just about race, it's also about adopting certain political ideologies and cultural values, often aligned with conservative far-right views. So the concept challenges the simplistic view of whiteness as a purely racial identity and suggests that it can also be occupied by people of various racial backgrounds. You don't have to be white to have whiteness, to have the original sin of whiteness. All you have to do is maybe believe that nationalism is good, maybe believe that tradition is good, just those awful things.
Yeah, if you want to perpetuate any sort of what they would deem to be societal repression, then you are guilty, and it's considered fair game that people would come at you without any restraint, that silence is violence.
Yeah. Latinos, Black Americans, any non-white individuals can be considered far right. They can be considered to have whiteness too. It says multiracial whiteness is rooted in a desire to achieve the freedom to express, there you go, first of all. Remember how Summer defined it for us earlier. Freedom to them is not the same thing, doesn't have the same definition as we mean when we say freedom. To them, freedom means expressing a full range of, the bad freedom is expressing a full range of reactionary attitudes, from celebrating political incorrectness that Trump wore as a badge of honor to a deep commitment to the politics of exclusion. So what whiteness is it's ultimately exclusive. Painting with a broad brush. Whiteness makes one dislike perceived political correctness. See, the perceived political correctness. Political correctness is also identity politics, and they're saying identity politics doesn't exist, right? It's just your perception. That's something that far-right people say. If you reject progressive racial politics, and if you favor what they call, quote, a version of American identity that emphasizes individualism and exclusion. So you see there the false paradigm. If you believe in individualism, you also believe in exclusion. That's a false paradigm. But this is how to do it. We're in a postmodern world, right? The idea that there is any kind of objective truth has been squashed. It's not part of the argument anymore. The truth is, whatever they say, the truth is. They say that whiteness makes a person disagree with political correctness, and that whiteness makes one support exclusionary politics. It suggests that any individual can embody whiteness by taking a nativist worldview that reflects a desire to return to a supposedly greater America. So when anybody of any racial background favors nationalism, anybody who questions immigration policy, anybody who views America in a traditional sense Well, you're a Christian nationalist, clearly. You're embracing whiteness. Doesn't matter if you're Latino, if you're black, if you're Chinese. Right, so they would, I'm sure, under this rubric, they would accuse Xi Van Fleet and Lily, what's her name?
Lily Tang.
Lily Tang Williams. Mm-hmm. These two ladies who lived in China during Mao's Cultural Revolution, and they know all about it, and they see it happening here, but they've been infected with whiteness, according to the woke mob.
Imperialism.
What is far right? I want to get down to the bottom of this right now. What is far right and far left? Because they're creating class consciousness using terms like far right and far. They don't use far left. They just say far right. Well, what is it? What is far right? We live in a liberal democracy here, right? A constitutional republic, more specifically, but we don't have any fascists. I mean, our nation's not fascist. Trump's not a fascist, but they use the term fascist. So what is the definition of far right? Throughout the 20th century, far right referred to political ideologies and movements of extreme nationalism, authoritarianism, a rejection of liberal democracy, which is what we live in, hopefully for a little while longer. Far-right groups typically embraced traditionalism, viewed social hierarchies as natural, and often promoted xenophobic and racially exclusive policies. Okay, that's true.
Right, and because we know, and we've studied them, we know that fascism is just the right hand of the left.
Yeah, exactly.
So it's the tactic that they themselves, the power elite, will use. If they can't use communism, they're going to use fascism.
Yeah. So I think what another way to say that fascism is the right hand of the left is to say that they're both socialism. They're both socialism,
right,
done a different way. I'll explain. I'll break that down for you in just a second. But let's break it down even more. The far right is fascism, or the nationalist version of socialism. The far left is communism, or the globalist form of socialism. Okay, we got it. Far right is the nationalist version, the isolationist version of socialism. The far left is communism. It's globalist socialism, okay? Because Karl Marx said, workers of the world unite. His movement was a global movement.
Well, and think about it, because we just did this article showing you guys, giving you two really great researchers who've written books about how, look at who was actually planting this whole idea to begin with. It rolls out in Russia. And then you've got the Communist Party in America, which is founded before the Communist Party in China. And then here comes the Mao Revolution. And when you're in China, you can see there's Lenin and there's Marx right there in their public square being celebrated. We've got China, Xi Jinping celebrating Marx's 200th birthday. Hello.
Let's watch it.
It's all there.
Let's watch it.
It's all there.
Right here it is. As they play the Chinese national anthem, or whatever they call it. That says it all. Who's that? Who's that guy?
Amazing.
That's not all. I got another clip for you. Just for those people who say, hey, nobody pays attention to Karl Marx anymore. That's old.
To discuss these issues and more, I'm very happy to be joined here by Professor Zhang Xudong of Comparative Literature at New York University. That's our topic. This is a dialogue. I'm Yang Rui. But before we get started, let's take a quick look at this.
2 centuries on, society has witnessed the dramatic changes, but the name of Karl Marx is remembered and respected all over the world, and his theories, known as Marxism, maintain the bright light of truth.
That's enough, right? Maintain the bright light of truth. Okay.
Which is just absolutely inversion.
This
an
is
inversion of reality. Sorry.
This is the far left. Now the far right is they glorified their military power. They were staunchly opposed to modernist and progressive values. They held an inflated, often imaginary sense of tradition, like in the Nazi regime. They had this Aryan history that they made up, literally made up. And let's see, they also glorified their military power. They used violence or the threat of violence to achieve their political objectives. They held a deadly opposition to communism and the far left, because the far left was seen as their archenemy. The far left was seen as a threat to traditional social order and national integrity. So far-right movements were responsible, as we said, for killing nearly 30 million of their own people in the name of socialism. So the next time you hear somebody telling far-right here, and it's not here, that's not, whoa, I'm testing the waters over here, about knocked everything over. That's not happening here. You might hate Trump. You might think he's just way too conservative or whatever. I don't think he's conservative enough. I'm right of Donald Trump. Many of us are, but that's not happening here. That's a tactic to create class conscience here. What is the far left? The far left referred explicitly to communism or the globalist form of socialism. They aim to break down all nationalistic and ethnic racial distinctions in realizing utopia or the perfected state and society. Examples would be Lenin, Stalin, and Khrushchev's Soviet Union, Mao Zedong's China, several other badly failed regimes in the 20th century. And in all, these far left governments, everybody's talking about far right, this and that. Well, the far left movements killed at least 110 million of their own people in the name of progress and equality under socialism. The far right and the far left were mortal enemies, even though they held many ideas in common. Primarily their utter hatred for liberal democracy. They both relied on propaganda, violence, and intimidation to shut down their political opponents. And that brings me to this next little piece here. Let's see, does it look like class consciousness? Are we seeing any kind of social segregation happening in America? As far as I'm concerned, it looks like Herbert Marcuse and Horkheimer, later on Foucault, I believe they were successful. It's been quiet for many years, but there it is. Oh, look at this. This is interesting, too. Remember, Kamala is Brad? Look at that.
Yeah, because they want to topple capitalism.
Everything. Burn it all down.
Capitalism has to go.
Yep. All right. Now here is Vivek Ramaswamy went out, I don't know where he was when he did this, but I guess
a couple days ago.
He's in Chicago maybe?
Yeah.
At the DNC
I think so,
last week. And he goes out to the communist kiosk and has a word with the local communists selling their what would you call it, their collateral?
Their marketing collateral.
From America is the American section of the Revolutionary Communist.
May I take some literature?
You can read it, but it is for sale.
You know, the reason is it's not really here. Communism's not really here. It's not really a thing. It's not really something we should worry. Okay, all right, well, what is this?
That's for free now.
It's for sale.
I know. In a capitalist
country. Capitalism. How much is it?
Depends. So that's all under $5. Paper's $5.
I think we can afford that.
I would say so.
Let's got my wallet somewhere we can get.
You got Venmo, CashApp. You got the link.
I like this. See, the communists have Venmo. They've got all the digital infrastructure. I like that. Well, we can do cash. What's your best book?
Oh, best book? Well, let's see. I don't want to give you one you might use.
Yeah, remember, we got to look at what's on this
here,
paper.
Robert, if you want to know what we're about, brother.
That's good. Absolutely. What's this one about?
This is our paper. We write this and we produce it monthly.
How much is this?
Also $5.
Let's see.
What's this one about?
He'll hold it up in a second.
The party of the next American Revolution has been founded. Yeah.
Paper. We write this and we produce it monthly.
How much is this?
Also $5.
All right. We'll give him a second $5.
And it's funny because it was founded over 100 years ago.
Yeah.
So let me ask you, here's my issue. This is one of my issues with Kamala Harris. I want your perspective on it. I think she has two issues. She has not stated.
He's just going to go on. He's going to go on politics here. He's going to talk about the fact she hasn't stated her policies. And these guys are not going to answer because they're really not interested in her that much. It doesn't seem like.
But he does talk about his actual like he's a pure communist.
Yeah, so I'm going to get to where he's actually speaking.
There's a bit of a paradox there. But, all I would say is...
A paradox in what exactly?
Of controlled rhetoric, right? You have a lot of corporate interests controlling the way in which they actually assail those very corporate interests, which is kind of interesting. It is. I think we might be saying something similar. It's all a bit of a charade.
Yeah, I would say one thing that is definitely we're not similar on is you were talking about unification of like the far right and the far left. There is no.
I don't know about unification, but there may be some common thread.
All right. So when he says far right and far left, he has a very specific definition in mind. He's not really thinking about Donald Trump.
No, and he's also thinking in terms of polarization. Like he wants to be completely radical in his thinking.
Yeah.
He doesn't want to find common ground.
Yeah.
Because for him, it's all about just overthrowing the system.
Yeah, and when he says far left, he doesn't mean Kamala Harris. He means himself. He means his movement.
Well, we would say this: there is no perfect American communism, American socialism like this. These other little parties popping up. It has to be international. We aren't here for the success of America.
So the idea there again is that socialism is the stage. That communism is the realization of perfected socialism. The idea is kind of what he's saying here. It's not. There is no perfect one, but because it's only perfected in the final coming of the communist agenda, communist lord.
American working class, because the only way we can be there for the success of the American working class is the international working class in Canada and in Mexico. If you had some, and now we don't believe in this, but let's say there was some perfect, socialist America, it would immediately get pushed out by China, by Russia, by Europe. So we need an international socialist revolution in order to secure a true victory for the working class.
And that's very true to the communist message. They want it to be for the entire world.
And so, why is he saying that? Why are they here? Why are they in the United States of America, this capitalist nation, trying to do that? And that's because the capitalist stage is necessary for the communist stage. These guys do seem to be more like classic Marxists. They seem to be more in line with Stalin, Lenin, Mao. Right? They don't. Maybe more Stalin than Lenin. I don't know about Mao so much. These guys seem to be more classic Marxists. Anyway, we thought that would be pretty interesting to show you. That it's here. It's real. There's different versions. See, the Communist Party, socialism, fragmented into many parts after the Stalin atrocities were revealed, because they had to come up with different arguments to support it, and some didn't want to support it, didn't want to argue for it this way. So there's just different schools of thought in it. Now, this is more like the classic version, in my opinion. So what we're seeing, though, in the larger movement here, the reason there's so much polarization, which is how we started the show off, is this idea of social segregation. And this is an article also that... there's the whiteness article. Here it is. Socially distant, how our divided social networks explain our politics. So this article helps us to understand a little bit about the nature of the divisions. Let's see if we recognize anything. Overall, the composition of one's social network, the people you talk to online, in person, at work, at home, that network heavily influences political engagement, attitudes, and the ability to navigate social and ideological differences. In other words, it determines how well you integrate into your society. American social networks are deeply segregated by race and politics, reinforcing existing biases and beliefs. But why is that? Why has that happened? It's because class consciousness is something that has been consistently pushed on us for decades now. Most white, 77% of white people and 56% of black people, black Americans, have racially homogenous core social networks. And a similar pattern exists with over half of Republicans and Democrats. In other words, everyone surrounds themselves with like-minded individuals. They don't want to be challenged on their positions. Social self-segregation amplifies this partisan loyalty. So when we go out and we don't seek to engage the other side, that builds more partisan. It makes us more partisan. It limits our exposure to differing perspectives. It reduces openness to compromise. Americans that are more politically diverse, I wouldn't put it politically diverse. I might say when we're willing to go out and thoughtfully engage with other people. People like that, well, you're going to be criticized more, for sure, because you're going to be encountering more people who don't agree with you. But you're also more likely to question your assumptions, more likely to be more humble. And you're also likely to feel more social stress. So there's a lot of factors at work. The article says, despite efforts to diversify public spaces, the report finds stark partisan divides on issues like racial discrimination, significantly different perceptions between Democrats and Republicans, especially regarding whether or how bad discrimination against black Americans really is. White people and black people don't seem to agree on the degree of that. So, just some interesting things I thought we'd point out to you. Also, Kamala Harris, story about her, she said she was, at the DNC, she said she was all about victims of sexual abuse. She spent her career doing it. Well, we talked about this earlier, and this was an article from Leighton Woodhouse and Lee Fang on the Substack, and this was the article about how she refused to assist victims of Catholic Church
abuse. The other thing is too is being for calling attention to sexual abuse is one of the talking points that the World Economic Forum has put out that they're caring about, and also her idea about joy, right? So we see this direct crossover between the way that she's campaigning herself and actually all of the talking points that the World Economic Forum has as well. So there's a direct crossover as far as they are completely in alignment.
Let's see, is this it right here?
The story. I think the question is, are we blaming the 99%? Or are we blaming the messaging, the story? And to me, it's the story. And the story that youth are hearing would drive anybody into anxiety, panic. I just am talking to a mother whose daughter committed suicide. Climate anxiety suicide, not just any suicide.
Climate anxiety suicide.
That they themselves created. Problem, reaction, solution.
Our narrative is absolutely, I'm sorry, it's just guaranteed to create inaction, to create polarization, to create all the things we're seeing.
You're hearing French postmodernism. Well, I don't even say it's French postmodernism. It's even worse. It's they've even, like, I wouldn't blame Jean Baudrillard for this so much. This is something that since the 60s has blossomed out, because this is some real bleeding heart weirdness right here. There's no question that as the person underneath the tweet here says, wokeness, this perspective he's speaking from has a much stronger correlation with anxiety and self-harm, depression, than whatever other perspective he's trying to critique here. Many studies have found that conservatives show an advantage in mental health and happiness, and various causes of this have been debated, right? Whether it's religiousness, ideology, or genetics. This is a tweet from Lisa Logan. There's someone you should follow on Twitter if you're there. Mm-hmm. Hey, you should follow us on Twitter if you're there. We could sure use your support over there. as we drift off
into the ether,
into the blackness of the dumpster fire over there. Anyway, she said, this video proves the left knows that their doomsday narrative about climate change is negatively affecting the anxiety of youth, even resulting in death. Hence, why they are now focusing on a new narrative of resilience, part of social emotional learning.
And they've got their unaliving pods as a solution as well.
Yeah, Dr.
If they can't get you to, take the happiness pill.
Yeah. So this is why they're talking about joy and well-being. There's actually 18 sustainable development goals, right? Some of the zero, the one before the first one is actually joy and well-being. It's that spiritual element.
Yeah, they really do. This is directly out of World Economic Forum.
So let's listen to Robert Mueller here for a second. The guy who gave us Common Core, World Core curriculum, but it's Common Core in the United States. Humanity has become priority number 2. Environment and Earth is priority number 1.
It is the Earth which has become number 1.
So I wonder why someone might feel depressed, especially if you believe this, and especially if you're steeped in this, right? The Earth is more important than you. And this man was talking about...
Worship the creation over the creator.
Yeah, that's Romans 1.
We do not want population to increase. We would like to have consumption of the Earth's resources to be diminished. The environment and the Earth have become priority number 1. And humanity has become priority number 2.
How about that? Let's listen to this. She Van Fleet has a good tweet here that Summers found for us, where Oprah is out there. She's pushing class consciousness.
She also pushes Christ consciousness.
Christ consciousness as well, but yeah, no doubt about it. Here she's pushing the knowingly or not, I don't know if she knows if this is what she's doing. She might just be, I don't know what she thinks.
Oh, I think she knows.
I don't know what she knows, but listen to this. Tell me what you think she's doing.
Redwood forests, love those redwoods, to the Gulf Stream waters. I've seen racism and sexism and income inequality and division. I've not only seen it, at times I've been on the receiving end of it. From the redwood forest, love those redwoods.
So it's again, remember, it's about whiteness. It's this whiteness is the original sin of this current leftist movement, which we're identifying as.
Therefore, we must all, as a collective, agree to be complicit in genociding an entire group of people who are responsible for what we consider to be colonialization and the imperialization of the world, even though the ultimate colonization of the entire planet for all time will be what they're doing.
Yeah, it's right there. It is. It's the ultimate colonization. The colonization of the planet is what they're looking for. Okay. On June 9th, 2001, just 3 months before 9/11, Bill Clinton, after having freshly exited his 2-term presidency and handing the reins of the executive branch over to George W. Bush, Bill Clinton just so happened to utter a truth more shockingly relevant than perhaps anyone realized at the time. 23 years later, as America suffers a pernicious infection of authoritarianism, Clinton's veritable revelation exposes the root cause of the suspicion so many of us have that the U.S. Constitution has become a dead letter. It's there as a symbol, but no longer honored or enforced, and perhaps has even been replaced. I think I have a clip here of someone. I remember someone. There was someone the other day talking about the Constitution is just a. There she is. Here we go.
We can't just worry about protecting democracy. In this moment, we've got to reimagine it with people that look and love like us at the center. And I think for us right now, it's about reimagining freedom and this American...
There's class consciousness. People like us at the center. People like who? People like us. You know, me, us, those of us. Not whiteness. If you can't have this original sin and disease of whiteness.
Story in a way that is more revolutionary than what our founders actually put down on that little piece of paper, but instead is the type of
That's the Constitution she's talking about. That little piece of paper, that little insignificant piece of paper.
Democracy that is by and for all of the people of this country. That's the opportunity that we have. We can't just worry about protecting democracy. In this moment, we've got to reimagine it.
All right.
Marx.
That's right. Many of us suspected this, right? That the Constitution is something's up, and we've covered this here before. It's there as a symbol, but is it being honored? Is it being enforced? Has it been replaced? Are there two constitutions? Well, while speaking at his 2001 Georgetown University class reunion, while reflecting on the political divisions in the United States, Clinton remarked to his fellow alumni, if you look back on the 60s, on balance, you think there was more good than harm. You're probably a Democrat. If you think there was more harm than good, you're probably a Republican. Clinton was referring to the civil rights movement and the legislation that was passed soon after the assassination of JFK. It's become quite common in America for sweeping legislation to be passed in the wake of a tragedy. Fear and shock have become more effective than lobbying and debate, careful debate, thoughtful conversation. No, fear and shock. That's how we pass policies now. Americans in the 1960s were dealing with an array of taxing emotions: the shock of the public execution of the president on live TV, the fear of the Russians putting a satellite over their heads, the sense of wonder elicited by the space program and the moon landing, and the anger and dismay of Lyndon Johnson's Vietnam War, like the USA Patriot Act of 2001 and the CARES Act of 2020. Civil rights legislation of the 1960s was quickly presented and enacted while the nation was in shock. And while the people were dazed and confused by conflicting emotions of grief and pride, fear and vanity, anger and shame, those emotions were plugged in. Those emotions were fomented. They were implanted. Right? This is the time when Marcuse was active, very active. In short, American people were primed and vulnerable to be hoodwinked in a way that might forever alter the course of America's constitutional republic. The civil rights movement was supported first by appeals to emotion, not by love for one's neighbor, appeals to emotion. Just like the climate change movement is not, they're not standing on science, they're standing on appeals to emotion. Love your neighbor. You're supposed to do this because it's right. And then by court decisions and executive actions. The legislation that led to perhaps the most significant social transformation in the history of the United States was also the impetus for the subversion of the original United States Constitution and the quiet introduction of a second Constitution that stands in contradiction to the principles on which American freedom, justice, and liberty were founded. The government authorized itself to influence elections, to withhold funds, to meddle in private businesses, to persecute your political opposition in the courts. Much like today, when agencies have been created and given the power to enforce arbitrary policies of diversity, equity, and inclusion, in the 1960s, the civil rights movement, okay, camera's out. Can you give me a graphic up there?
I have one for you.
Thank you very much. All right. In the 1960s, the civil rights movement was hijacked by a faction that placed offices of civil rights in the major cabinet agencies, which were empowered to issue legally binding guidelines, quotas, and targets, rather than the rule of law. American social, business, and political life was commandeered by judges. So if you can own the judge, if you can appoint the judges, the federal judges, you can control the nation. Christopher Caldwell, author of The Age of Enlightenment, America Since the 60s, said this in his book. Americans assumed that solving the unique and extraordinary problem of segregation would require handing Washington powers never before granted in peacetime. But they were also confident that the use of these powers would be limited in time, a few years at most. Let's end racism, and then we'll put the genie back in the bottle. We'll put these executive powers away. That was a misjudgment, with fateful consequence for the country's political system. It would end up a wide-ranging reinvention of American government. So after the work of the civil rights movement in ending segregation was done, the civil rights model of executive orders, regulation writing, and court-ordered redress remained. This was the so-called rights revolution, an entire new system of constantly churning political reform, bringing tremendous gains to certain Americans, and something that is mentioned less often, losses to many who had not necessarily been the beneficiaries of the injustices that the Civil Rights Act was meant to correct. The United States had not only acquired two codes of rules, two constitutions. As people rallied to one code or the other, they also sorted themselves into two sets of citizens, two countries. To each side, the other's constitution might as well have been written in invisible ink. Progressive judges and administrators used civil rights as a means to an end, which was to bypass the spirit and word of the Constitution. And in the years that followed, more and more policies in the name of social changes that the people neither expected nor wanted came in rapid succession. Affirmative action, restriction on free speech on college campuses, weakening of American borders, gay marriage, transgender as a protected class, and a censorship of opposing points of view in the public square. What happened to America in the 1960s, disguised as a righteous act in the name of rights and equality, was not just the addition of a major new element to the Constitution. It was the creation of a second conflicting constitution that would become increasingly more incompatible over the years. On the watch of every president, Republican, Democrat alike, every elected and appointed official to the three branches of the federal government, they're all guilty. America was sold out to activism and reflexive administrative law. In 2024, America is not only divided politically, socially, and morally, the nation's also divided by two constitutions. There's two completely different countries living at the same time in the same place. Christopher Caldwell explains that we are divided by the pre-1964 Constitution with all the traditional forms of jurisprudential legitimacy and centuries of American culture behind it, or the de facto Constitution of 1964, which lacks this traditional kind of legitimacy, but commands the near unanimous endorsement of judicial elites and civic educators and the passionate allegiance of those who received it as a liberation. Two social orders existing at once explains an awful lot of what we see happening in our country right now. The arresting of political opponents, censorship in the public square, the de-defining of marriage to include any arrangement in the imagination, social justice rather than pure justice, flexible policies that undulate according to the moods of the elites and the judges in their employ, and the open disregard for the rule of law in Washington, D.C. The civil rights movement led by Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. was clearly hijacked by radicals. King might have been one of those radicals himself. Beginning in the 1970s, it appealed to the emotions and the good sense of the majority of the American people who believed what they were being told, and it quietly set the stage for a total apostasy from the founding principles of the nation. Affirmative action was the mutant cell that would metastasize into the cancerous tumor of political correctness. It was affirmative action that actually led to what we see today, this idea of hate speech. They're connected. I'll get into that in another show with you. This is something from Stephen Hicks's work too. We don't have time for it today, but it's very interesting. We'll do a show on free speech soon, and I think that'll be helpful for you. But Caldwell says that over time, affirmative action and political correctness hardened into pillars of the second Constitution. affirmative action, political correctness. That's where you get hate speech. That's where you get cancel culture. Both affirmative action and political correctness were derived from the basic enforcement powers of civil rights law. And this was the only civil rights on offer. If you didn't like affirmative action and political correctness, you didn't like civil rights. By 2013, when Americans began arguing over whether a cake maker could be forced to make a pro-gay marriage cake, this was all clear. Not only was the nation divided by two contradictory constitutions, the people also effectively separated themselves into two sets of citizens, two separate nations under one flag. Democrats believe that racism is a bigger problem than political correctness, and Republicans believe that political correctness is a bigger problem than racism. Caldwell suggests the Tea Party uprising of 2009 and 10 and its political mirror image, the Black Lives Matter uprising of 2015 and 16, are more symbols of that division. Barack Obama, both for his fans and detractors, was the first president to understand civil rights law in the way described here, as a de facto constitution by which the de jure constitution could be overridden or bypassed. In his second inaugural address, an explicitly constitution-focused argument, he invoked Seneca Falls and Selma and Stonewall, i.e., women's rights, civil rights, and gay rights as constitutional milestones. Let me read for you what Barack Obama, quickly, what he said about the Constitution. In his book, The Audacity of Hope, Barack Obama said, implicit in the Constitution structure, in the very idea of ordered liberty, was a rejection of absolute truth, the infallibility of any idea or ideology or theology or ism or any tyrannical consistency that might lock future generations to a single unalterable course or drive both majorities and minorities into the cruelties of the Inquisition, the pogrom, the gulag, or the jihad. There is no absolute truth. And that's the absolute truth. What a ridiculous thing to say, right? But it just slides right through. In this view, the old republic built on battlefield victories was overthrown by a new one built on rights marches. Today, it's these flag burnings. When Justice Anthony Kennedy wrote his decision in Obergefell versus Hodges, the 2015 gay marriage case that was in many ways the culmination of this new rights-based constitution, he confirmed all of this. And the election of 2016 brought the change into focus. Today, in 2024, two nations staring each other down in mutual incomprehension across an impeachment hearing room, across a campus quad, maybe in your own living room. Wherever, though, it appears that we're facing a constitutional problem of the profoundest kind. And how do we restore this integrity, right, what we've just talked about here? How do we restore the integrity of the public square? How do we break down these political barriers that are currently preventing any rational and careful discourse in the public square? And why is it so important that we do it? As Francis Schaeffer said, each generation of the church in each setting is responsible for communicating the gospel in terms that their culture can understand. That means we have to consider the language and the thought forms of where we lived and the time in which we live. Remember Ephesians 5? We have to know the times in which we're living, because the days are evil. Schaeffer proposes two priorities for Christians. Number one, there are certain unchangeable facts which are true and do not change or evolve with the changing standards of society. There are absolute, objective, eternal truths, and they are the foundation of the Christian faith and the doctrine. And if these truths are ignored, if we allow these truths to be stamped on, if we allow these truths to be mitigated or forgotten or not allowed, then Christianity loses its whole meaning to the culture. And I want to remind you, that's what we're here for. We're here to affect the culture. We're not here to be affected by the culture. That's what it means to be in the world and not of the world. That means we're here to affect the culture, not to be affected by it. That's what it means to let your light shine, to not hide it under a basket, to be salt and light. Number two, we're in the midst, most likely, of a great shaking, a rapidly changing historical situation where the expression of our faith requires that we understand these present thought forms, that we understand what's happening. What are people saying? How do we know what's true? How do we respond to their claims and their arguments? What do people believe? Why do they believe it? How do we meet them where they are, so to speak, with the unchangeable principles of Christianity? Stay tuned. All right, well, that's all we've got for you today. Hopefully we can answer that question for you in every show that we do here. This is what we're trying to do, right? We've got, we're not battling against the flesh. It's a spiritual war. And so how do we fight the spiritual war? With prayer, being in the Word every day, and after those two, we expose darkness. Ephesians 5:11, is that what it is? I think it is. All right. Well, that's it. Some, you got anything to add?
No, I don't. That's a lot to cover.
Yeah, quite a bit.
Yeah.
All right. I was just going to check and see if there's anything we missed. There's quite a bit we missed, but. So I just want to remind you guys at the top, that quote, that Marcuse quote, is important because we have to, we need to be aware, we need to understand the times we live in, and if our government's corrupt, we need to know that, we need to respond to it well, but we've got to be really careful that we don't become infected and spoiled by Marxist ideology because it's so ingrained in our culture. Remember we shared it with the other day, that old phrase, the rich get richer and the poor get poorer. That's not true. That's a Marxist trope that's just been ingrained in our culture. So we need to be really careful, especially those of us, like many of you here, and a lot of us our co-belligerents here on the internet and on YouTube, who are trying to expose what's happening in the world. And we want to do that because we need to understand the times in which we live so that we can understand these thought forms and respond effectively to them. To take the gospel to these people, we have to meet them where they are.
Yes, and I just wanted to say that the Christian cultural apologists must address this reinterpretation and advocate for a return to biblical truth and objective morality in a society increasingly fragmented by relativistic ideologies. So, they've taken advantage of our good nature to come in and say, yes, you can have a seat at the table. Yes, we understand that, there's certain things where you have suffered and we want to be compassionate and loving toward that. But, the thing is that a lot of people can't conceive of is that there would actually be a sinister strategy, a sinister worldview in which these people are operating from. Some people are just parroting things that they've heard and they don't really understand, but then definitely there are the activists that have been placed in our institutions and in our corporate culture and, just anywhere you name it throughout society to really consciously try to come against our way of life and to break it apart. And so I think it's just an aha moment when Brad and I discovered it, the Marxist strategy of how they want to go in and they want to understand what your grievances are and they want to come in and say, hey, I'm going to save the day and I'm going to liberate you from your oppressive situation. And then you think, oh, finally I've got a friend. But you need to understand that actually those people were very, very deceptive and they believe that they can because the ends justify the means and it's Machiavellian. And at the end of the day, it's the Antichrist spirit and that is the devil that is talking, that is promising everybody the sun, moon, and stars. And at the end of the day, once they've gotten everyone to buy into it and everyone to do their part to destroy this beautiful society that we have created, then the devil will be laughing and ha ha ha. I mean, we all know that man plans and God laughs. God is in control of the whole thing, but understand that this is the battle and that this has been the strategy is, divide and conquer, but also to come against our own culture, to come against our own heritage, to come against our own history. And that is the devil, guys. That is the devil. So it's time to stand up and say, no, we're not going to do that. We understand we need to take responsibility for this and that, but we don't have to take responsibility for all of it. And certainly it does not justify two wrongs, do not make a right. And it's very sinful to try to hoist upon a people that for everything that's happened in the past, they have to pay the reparations for it. It's very flawed. And we know that this audience is super smart and knows this. So, that's all.
Yeah, that's well said. That's a good point. Those are a lot of good points. Just look at the chat just for a moment before we get out here and under the 2 hour mark. But
here's a little comical slide right here.
Okay. Yeah.
Because otherwise we're just going right off the cliff, just like they want us to.
Yeah. So
you know what I'm saying?
From the chat, our viewer, real Colin Wise. So let me go with Marsha first. Says, let's see, where did that go? Let's see here.
Do you want me to read Marsha's comment?
No, I've got it right here.
All righty.
Minnesota has George Floyd Square on George Perry Floyd Lane with a giant commie fist statue in the middle. That's right. That is not a Black Lives Matter fist. They can say that all they want, but that is what it is. It is, that symbol is there for a reason. Yeah, and that's class consciousness. That's creating class consciousness. That's what the summer of 2020 was about, dividing the country on the lines of class consciousness. Okay.
Cultural revolution.
Exactly. That's what the Cultural Revolution is. And our viewer down here, Real Colin Wise, says, it's not who votes that counts, it's who controls the machine, the brain interface that counts. Well, in one sense, yes, it's very true that those who count the votes do have a lot, have control over that system if they're able to pull shenanigans, which they certainly can. But let me just challenge you there. If you're one who believes that maybe we shouldn't engage in the system, well, if not you, if not us, then who? Who will? Whether your vote counts, whether you think it counts or not, whether you think it's going to be counted correctly or not, if we don't engage it, if we don't, as Christians especially, if we don't engage the system, and as Spirit-filled Christians go there and influence it with the light and the salt that we're called to carry, then who will? If not us, then who will? I mean, we've got this gift that the Lord's given us, this nation where we can be free, if we can keep it. So we can't sit it out.
I was going to say, can you call up that James White?
Well,
clip.
We're out of time.
All right. Well, I encourage you guys to check out the last show that James White did on Alpha and Omega Ministries. He gave a really interesting talk yesterday about Marxism and understanding that it's not about, a lot of people feel betrayed because of, Trump's position on abortion. But by the same token, you definitely don't want to put you don't want to abstain from voting. I mean, obviously everybody's going to do what their conscience is telling them that they need to do, but you don't want to abstain from voting and give that extra bit to the fact that Harris and Walz might win. That I think that's pretty dangerous.
Yeah, let's see. Let me try to find
even
it.
If it is,
Broadly,
even if this is the selections and not the elections.
Rebels against God. And they want the ability to murder babies. That's all there is to it. They think it's a right. They think
James is here talking about, he's addressing the issue of Christians who are not going to vote because they don't want to vote for Trump. All right, that's what he's addressing.
I think it's awesome. They think it's great. It's a good thing. So when you have a morally decrepit people like that, and you want to get elected, then you have to pander to their moral decrepancy, in essence. And so a decision has been made. They changed the platform. It's not.
So you're talking about the Republican Party now softening up on their abortion position?
That the Republican Party of 2024 is the Democratic Party of 2000. I'm not sure about 2014, 2004 maybe. I was going to say about 20 years. And it's true.
He got into my consciousness.
And that is a betrayal. Mm-hmm. And here's what I'm hearing. Here's what I'm hearing people saying. And for a while, I bought this. I agreed. And that is, look, if, because I left the Republican Party in the late 90s, as I recall. It may have been middle 90s. Because they were giving money to pro-choice Republican candidates. So the National Committee would give money to people who were pro-choice as long as they were running as Republicans. And I'm like, nope, not going there. So I went independent, left the Republican Party because I was more conservative than the Republican Party. So I'm to the right of the Republican Party on almost everything, certainly the cultural issues. So here's what people are saying. They're saying, look, if we keep voting for them, then they'll keep moving that direction. We're rewarding them. They know that if we're going to vote, we're going to vote for them. We're not going to vote for the other side, unless you're David French, and then you're just completely suicidal. So, you can't keep voting for the lesser of two evils. You always keep getting evil. Okay. 20 years ago, would have agreed with that thinking. I really would have. I don't anymore. Why? Because, and people keep saying, I thought you were a post-millennialist. Again, hello. Has nothing to do with recognizing that you're living in a culture under the judgment of God. And I am not, I actually lean away from this conclusion, but I lean away from the conclusion that we are going to have a fair and free election, but in a matter of weeks. I don't see how what happened last time has actually been fixed. I've seen a few things. I've seen a Band-Aid over here and a Band-Aid over there, and one state over here decide, well, we kicked 1 million people off the voter rolls. Well, okay, great. How many millions of others have snuck on since, who knows? So I'm really having to try to work up positive hope to actually think there is any chance that the Marxists will not be elected in November, to be honest with you. But the corruption issue aside, the reason that I live in Maricopa County, so I've even got less reason to believe that my vote will even be counted or be counted for the people that I gave it to or whatever. It's just where I live, sort of like living in Chicago. But despite all of that, the difference, and every 4 years, this is the most significant election of our lifetimes. You've heard it so many times that it's just like, it's the boy who cried wolf. You stop listening to it and you don't even hear it anymore. When you look at the level of evil, and I mean evil, biblical, moral, ethical evil represented by the Marxists in this election, I mean, I'm looking at a Federalist article that effective July of 2025, teacher licensing rules passed last year in Minnesota under Democrat Governor Tim Walz will ban practicing Christians, Jews, and Muslims from teaching in public schools. Why? Because you must affirm all the gender ideology insanity to teach in the public schools in Minnesota. That's evil. That is a barefaced, we hate you, God, we hate your creation, we hate how you've made everything. Do your best to destroy us perspective. Okay, that's Tim Walz. That's what these people are. There's video of the Minnesota, well, not only is there video of the drag queen stuff that they had in the Capitol under Walz, but there's video of him signing that barbaric abortion up to birth law, as well as the one that protects doctors. If an abortion's botched, you have a live birth, you can just let it lay there until it dies. Here's the point. The argument that, well, we can't keep voting for these people, they'll never learn. After this one, I don't think it's going to matter. There's not going to be a 2028 election that has any actual meaningful hope of dislodging the quote-unquote deep state or anything like that. Like I said, 20 years ago, it made sense because you're sort of thinking, well, we've got a while to go. You know, we can hope for the best here. There's nothing to hope for the best after November 5th of this year. Is it 5th or 6th? I think it's the 5th. I think it's the 5th. There is absolutely positively no reason. Is the 5th? Yeah. So my response to those that are saying, well, you know, the Republicans will never learn if we don't, if we vote one way in this, if we don't vote in this election, we're gonna punish you for going the wrong direction on abortion. Okay. You may punish the Republicans, and with the result that you will never have anyone to vote for in the future that will even give consideration to any kind of end of human abortion at all.
So that's yeah, there goes the cameras out again. So that's James's point. Like if you don't, again, if not us, then who? And if you don't engage this time, well, there may not be anything left to engage in.
Right. So, you know, it could be the election, it could be this election, but let's definitely make sure that we think about what he had to say. I think if it's ever going to matter at all, we should vote, and definitely make a vote that wouldn't be for the Marxists.
All right. That's a good point, and I think that's a good place to leave it. All right, my friends, we'll see you again here very soon. God bless you, and thank you for watching us. And by the way, folks, if you could, please like this video. Just click that thumbs up. It doesn't cost anything. It's pretty easy to do, and it actually helps us, and we need all the help we can get because we've had videos removed.
We're so shadow banned. We've
been demonetized. We're hanging on by a thread here on YouTube. So you want to download the Armor of Truth mobile app because that's going to give you're going to know where we are whenever we go live, and we can send you a link right to your phone, or your device, or your
Are you at a loss for words?
Or your device, or whatever. Your device.
Your device.
Wherever you get an app on, we can send you a link right there, and you get live notifications.
And here's our snail mail. If you want to send us a card and say hi, send us some glamour shots.
If you want to support us that way,
glamour
you can do
shots
it too.
by Deb. Just kidding.
Armor of Truth, P.O. Box 729, Hudson, North Carolina 28638. You can support us that way too. You can send a check in that way, and we'll send you a receipt for that. If you want to send cash, you want to stay on the down low and just send cash, that's fine. We can do that too, but we need your help to stay alive and stay afloat because they're attacking us. So if you can support AOT financially, every donation or gift makes a difference. You can use the AOT mobile app Give tab, or you can visit our website, armoroftruth.net/donate, or just follow the links in the description under this video. So what are you waiting for? Download the Armor of Truth mobile app now. And once again, my name is Brad, and I'm joined by my lovely, talented, and precious wife, Summer. Together we're Armor of Truth, and we're seeking a worldview revolution through God's revelation.
Faith is resistance.
All right, folks, see you later.
The hammer comes down and beats you over the head for the rest of your life with a big national security stick. And so that people learn to duck their head and not speak up. Because, bad idea now.
This is the emergency broadcast system. This is not a test. Repeat, this is not a test. Citizens are advised to take the following steps.
Find us, armoroftruth.net.
In the age of technocracy, scientism, and pop atheism,
faith is resistance.
Nietzsche, of course, announced the death of God and called for the birth of the Übermensch, the Superman, who would take humanity to new heights and to create a new world order.
Find us at the Armor of Truth YouTube channel.
This is not a test. Repeat, this is not a test.